All right. We are trying to stream this week or we're trying to stream this month to Nimble Pro's YouTube and a few others. Just waiting to see. All right, go live. All right, how's everyone doing today? We are going to talk about master event storming for the win. And what does that mean? Now, mind you, we have done multiple event storming webinars in the past, so today has a little bit more than just that. Do you know anything about Nimble Pros? You know Ardalis is one of the co-founders, and so I have to quote this because this gets me thinking about event storming a little bit. Developers fail in two ways. Either we build the thing wrong, or we build the wrong thing. I'm coming at you as a developer, as an architect, as an event storming facilitator, so I have a little bit of everything going on there. And so when this happens, I want to let you know that this is common for us, but why does this happen so much? Sometimes it's just we don't understand our business domains. We don't understand the business logic of it all. Sometimes it's ambiguity, where we don't really know it. It's not complete misunderstanding. It's we understand it, but we're very confused in our understanding. And sometimes it's outright conflict, where one person in the domain says it's one thing, another person in the business says it's another. It's kind of frustrating how that happens. Another thing we run into is poor requirements. Again, going into the whole we fail to build the right things. This is a problem. So what do we do? Well, first of all, one of the things that we deal with, there's still one more problem actually, with failing to build the right things, and that's the technical versus business. This is a problem because there's what I call the versus situation, and that's not what we want. All right. So we need to stop building the wrong thing. Plain and simple, right? It sounds simple, but it's not. All those problems that we have, you're probably wondering, how is this related to event storming? We're about to go there. So stop building the wrong thing and let's start understanding your business. And this is where event storming can come into play. The key to all of these problems is communication. You don't know a domain. You don't know how something works. You see conflict because people aren't talking to each other. They're using different words for different things. So communication is key, as is ubiquitous language. What does that mean? That means we're all going to be on the same page using words. Like when I say a word, you know what that means. But you're probably going, but Sadukie, what does this have to do with event storming? Let me show you. So event storming, of course, to the rescue. If there's anything you know I love my sticky notes. So what do we do with event storming, and what do sticky notes have to do with this? Let's talk about what is event storming. So when we talk about event storming, you'll see a lot of sticky notes flying around, and we get into these details here, but the overarching thing is what Alberto Brandolini, the father of event storming, says, which is merge the people, split the software. Now, for you developers who are like, merging people, is that like a git merge? No, that is not like a git merge. That's not what we mean. When we hear merge the people, it's get everybody together in the room. Get them all together to have those conversations. Split the software means when you have those conversations, you start to see how to break out your software into the different sections. That's the key thing there. It's one of those where, let's take a look and see. So we do all these webinars monthly. Event storming, this is, I believe, our third one now. This one is going to take more of the facilitator and showing you how to get that mindset because it's going to set you up for success. But if you want to know the basics of event storming and the colors and the stories, we get into it here in the quickly on the basics chaos to clarity workshop or webinar. Webinar. We do have a workshop as well, but that's different. So we do have this webinar that talks about event storming at a high level. It gets into the colors and the details. We're not going to get into the sticky note colors and what they represent. That's another webinar. We're not going to get into using them for things like refactoring and process modeling and big picture. We're not getting into the nitty-gritty and the details because we already covered those elsewhere. With event storming, you want to remember there's sticky notes, there's conversations being had, we're capturing them here to understand complex business systems and to build that shared understanding of those complex business systems. If you're dealing with something like CRUD apps, that's a different story. So let's see. What are some good examples of complex business systems? So some examples include things like enterprise resource planning platforms, or ERPs, event management platforms. One does not simply attend an event. There's so much going on behind the scenes for organizing those tickets and organizing your speakers and planning sessions, things like that. All in one platform? That's not pretty straightforward. That gets complex. Human resources tracking, clinical trial management, e-commerce. Think of something like a genealogy platform. So we're at the time of year where I deal a lot with my family reunion and deal with family reunion decisions and family tracking. So genealogy is a thing that I get into. And so having to track, okay, where is everybody? That kind of platform isn't simple. You might be thinking, oh, that's a graph database, people connect to people. But those relationships also have documents. And then you're like, well, that's a document database. Well, but then you get all these mixes and matches. It's never straightforward. Investment management platforms, technology network planning, logistics. One does not simply schedule a shipment. These are not simple platforms. This is where event storming comes into play because you need to get out of your head. You need to get those ideas that you have on. Now, when it comes to event storming for things like this, there are 3 different types of people who need to be at the event storming sessions. There's the facilitator, there's the people with the questions, and people with the answers. I call them people with the answers because they could be what they call domain experts. They could be people who are masters of their silo. So you could be like, this person here actually understands the taxing way too well. So we go to them specifically for taxing. But we don't go to them for shipping logistics because that's not their specialty. So we bring everybody together, but the ones who are masters of a particular area will answer those questions. So who's involved in an event storming session? Well, this is where we get into things like developers, architects, domain experts, and product managers. I don't like using the term domain experts as just only the experts, only the people who know are in there. People who are using the products should also be there. People who are using the software. Because while they're not experts, they also have experiences, and their experiences will help you to realize certain things like that use case you couldn't picture because you didn't know it was there because you didn't know how your users are using your system. That happens. So bring as many people in who need to be able to answer questions, regardless of where their level is on that. Now, I use event storming for different problems and for different sections. The ones that I want to talk about today. The pointer. So big picture, this is one I use the most. This one I use especially with clients who they have an idea. They have an idea for a product, they have an idea for a platform, and they want to talk it out. Sometimes I have them where they're out there putting the sticky notes on there, and sometimes it's easier for them to have the conversations and other people putting up the sticky notes to capture those conversations. I've done both ways. And you might be like, but that's not event storming. Oh, it is. It is. It's just taking a different approach on it sometimes. Because you have to meet your audience where they're at. So we do big picture event storming, understand the shared understanding, everybody's involved, process modeling and understanding processes. Again, this is typically limited to a single end-to-end process, but you can then have conversations that lead to more processes and more process discovery. Discovery is definitely a conversation thing that happens. There is system design and refactoring and people experience, not getting into their details today, not getting into any of their details, just to let you know that we use event storming to solve these kinds of problems. Now, the whole reason why we're here today is to talk about event storming techniques. So this is coming from a perspective of a facilitator. The reason why I'm taking this approach is, as developers and architects in my audience, I know that sometimes we get a little too caught up in our minds, we get too caught up in our heads. We have our ideas, but we're too afraid to break out of that, or maybe we just don't know how. Sometimes we get stuck in our technical minds to the point where we're like, sometimes I feel awkward. Maybe I'm too technical to talk to that business person. I'm here to tell you, no. Let me show you some facilitator tips and tricks I use in making event storming sessions easier to follow, easier to get more information, and all those problems we talked about with confusing things and unexplained things in the domain start to come out more. So one of the things I use with event storming techniques is having a neutral facilitator. When it comes to being neutral, you have to be neutral to office politics, neutral to architectural decisions, and neutral to technology decisions. It's hard. I am going to speak from experience and tell you, running event storming sessions for projects that you are a part of can be difficult if you are the facilitator and you are a stakeholder. You have to remember as a facilitator that your internal biases for or against things need to just be gone. Sometimes I do this presentation, I have a slide that would be check your biases at the door. So I have very particular feelings over certain architectural things and technology things, but if you go to any of my event storming sessions, you have no idea those even exist because they're not important. When it comes to event storming things like process modeling and big picture, we're not getting into technical implementation. We're getting into conversations to understand how things are and to understand how things flow. When it gets into the implementation details, if you're doing something like refactoring and system design, the facilitator still has to be neutral, which means my feelings about certain things aren't there. If you're wondering what those are, I'll just tell you. When it comes to things like database stuff, I have opinions. When it has the platforms and how things are hosted, I have opinions. But those do not come out during event storming. I have to stay neutral. Why is that? You have to stay neutral because you don't know necessarily where things are going to go. And if you bring your biases and try to steer the conversation in a direction that might be not the right way to go, then you just set the project back further. So that's making it a little more difficult. But you need to stay neutral as a facilitator in all of this. Another thing I do is I set my rules up front. So when it comes to this, I will, if I'm working with a familiar group, there's a lot of rules that are already societally understood, and so then I don't have to explicitly state these, but I still want to make sure that it's clear. So things like no interrupting, focus on the facts. Sometimes you get groups that are very disorderly, so you have to implement the I'm holding a something. So I am holding a water bottle, for example. The person with the water bottle can make their point heard. If you don't have the water bottle, you need to wait until you get the water bottle, so raise your hand. Sometimes it gets to that, but for the most part, I'm working with civilized adults who understand to take turns. No interrupting. We have a few more guidance is coming up here in terms of playing off of each other's ideas and how we make it better, but explicit rules up front include the clear ground rules. So how do we interact with each other? This also includes things like clear boundaries. What are we focusing on in this meeting? An event storming session might be an hour, it might be 4 hours, it might be 2 days, it might be longer. It all depends. I typically will time box them to 3 to 4 hours just because that seems to be a good breaking spot. Anything larger than that, and then I find that focuses get distracted because they just feel overwhelmed because of the cognitive load of it all. So Just finding those explicit rules and setting them up front and being clear and setting those expectations. I could do a workshop for event storming at conferences, and when I do that, I say, okay, we're going to talk about, a presentation for an hour. We're going to then go take a 5 to 10 minute break, bio break, snacks, things like that. Come back. Then we're going to do this, do this, do this. I set the time boxing and I set those expectations clearly. That way they understand that they're not going to be doing this for hours on end. So be explicit with that. Another thing that we have are the visual cues. Now, when I do this in person, I'm more likely to have poster boards and sticky notes taped up to the poster board so they don't go flying everywhere, as sticky notes do. But when I do this, I tend to do most of my event storming nowadays digitally. So I'm using something like Miro.com. And so I have visual cues on there. Like I have a legend that will show the different sticky notes, their meanings. Sometimes it's a sticky note plus some key as to, okay, these have certain formalities to them, like events are written in past. It's an orange sticky note. What is an event and what does it represent? But then something like the hotspot. So the visual cues for hotspot are a couple things. When I call out hotspots, I point out two things. So event storming actually does have colors set for different sticky notes representing different things. However, you have to adapt with your tools at times. And for example, using Miro for pain points and risks and hotspots. The books on facilitating event storming talk about red or purple sticky notes, but those colors are too close to systems or other business policies, for example. So when I'm using Miro, I use black sticky notes. Why? Because pain points. We want pain points to stand out. We do not want to hide them. We do not want to lose them. Pain points become problems to solve, or they come out as problems to follow up on after this event storming session. So I have visual cues and I have intentional visual cues. Now you're probably wondering, well, what does this matter as a software developer or architect? These are things that we don't necessarily think about when it comes to our meetings that we're attending, but we need to understand that this is how we can interact with others and some of the things that we can do to make our interactions with others go better. Now let's talk about clear intentions and boundaries. This has to be stated clearly. So what is the goal of this event storming session? Our event storming session is to learn more about whatever it is. For example, currently I'm working on making another architectural kata, and I want to deal with a parking platform, which deals with sensors and which deals with parking meters. Parking meters have both the ability to take coins and take credit cards. So I want to do an event storming session to understand what people think about this system and how it would operate. Very clear intentions as to what I want to talk about. You don't want to limit it too much because you don't want to stifle creativity and curiosity. But you also have to be able to pay attention to time boxing and your actual goals. So I could say our goal here is to build a shared understanding of this domain, not to prove anyone wrong. That's the other thing that we have to set is the tone. We have to create a safe space. I can't stress this enough. I've been in situations where you have conversations and then all of a sudden office politics show up. And then this person outranks this other person, and now this person is trying to shut down this other person. That causes issues in event storming. We don't want that kind of space. What we want is the ability to be curious, to ask questions. Because then when you ask questions, then you start to see where's understanding at. What do we need? What are the details? You need to create a safe spot for experimentation and checking each other to see, are these where we are supposed to be? And is this understanding really, is my understanding the same as yours? You need to create a safe spot for people to be able to safely dissent without fear of judgment or retribution. And so if something is causing conflict in the domain, you need to have those conversations. I get brought in to have these hard conversations because they're hard because of the human side of it. They're hard because of the office politics. They're hard because of just natural tensions in certain relationships. That's just what happens in these things, and they can cause issues and cause an unbalanced space, and you lose that psychological safety as well. As a facilitator, or even as just a general participant, it's okay to say I don't know, and to show that. This slide includes a link to the power of vulnerability. I'll include it in the thank you email. This is Brene Brown. And vulnerability is okay. You're human. You're not a computer. You're not a script. You are not your code. And so it's okay to say I don't know. And then let's ask who might know, because you're in an event storming session typically with the people who have questions and the people who have answers. And if you know anything about me in Hamilton, you know I have to have it. But it's just the event storming happens in the room where it happens. You want to be part of the room where it happens because your I don't know gets answered. It's awesome to see in event storming these questions that people come up with, and other people around the room are like, well, that was common knowledge we thought, but turns out we're all wrong. Saying I don't know is okay. No stupid questions. I always have to smile and laugh at this because people are like, but, and I'm like, just ask the questions. You want to have a space that is safe for people to ask questions. Again, it shows what people know, it shows what people don't know, it could even show you what you don't know because you don't have that line of thought, that way of thinking. I see this especially when I'm dealing with a mixture of people, and you have those who are, I have a question about this topic, which we're looking at right now. But then you have the other people who are like, I have a question on a topic that's tangentially related to this one hop away. Okay, that's easy to follow. I got that. But then I also get the questions where they're like, I have a question about this thing that's related to this thing, that's related to this thing, that's related to this thing that I was reminded by when I saw our current topic. That happens too. As a facilitator and as a participant, you want to make sure that you're having the conversations, despite how many hops away they may be. As long as they're within the boundaries and as long as they're getting you answers to those questions to help you to build better software and to get better requirements, to get better understandings, that's fine. But as a facilitator, we have to make sure that people understand you can ask questions in addition to saying, I don't know. Disagreements. This is another tough one that we have to be okay with. And don't be the well actually person. I come from a line of well actually people, and I promise you, well actually is not a good thing. It's actually not a good thing. The well actually part, it makes people feel like they can't relate. When it comes to disagreements, don't pull out the well actually card. We'll talk about yes and we'll talk about some other ways to approach it. But understand that you can say, this is a really important counterpoint. Let's explore why you see it that way. So see disagreements as opportunities to learn from each other. Because the thing is, while you may disagree, you both may be right. You have different perspectives. You have different experiences. You have different stories. And they could make sense. You could both be wrong. There could be a third point of view missing. But these are the things we have to do up front, is set these kind of expectations and roles. And once you have things set up clearly, like, okay, here are our expectations, here are our boundaries, here's the safe space where you can ask all the questions, the next thing is to actually deal with things like introductions and icebreakers. And I think about Michelle, who works with us, and icebreakers, because she doesn't like icebreakers. And I'm in that boat with her. I don't like icebreakers either, except sometimes we have to do them to understand who's in the room. You have to understand what they do. When it comes to event storming, this is the icebreaker I deal with, which is, what are your favorite foods? Why? It's not that polarizing and that much causing disagreements to the point of anger. We keep it simple, we keep it tame. I do this though because I want to make sure people understand this is how the sticky note system works. Um, when you're dealing with this in person, you can see body language, you can see potential interactions where you see people who get along really well and you see people who don't get along really well. Start making notes of that. Uh, Something else that I've noticed too is it can teach you a bit about the region you're in. But for example, a few years back, I was working as a trainer, had to go out to Oregon. I am in Ohio, in the United States right now. Um, Oregon's Pacific Northwest. I'm in the Midwest. Different cultures, different foods. And they were like, hey, do you know about Marionberries? Like, no. And by the end, we were eating Marionberry pie on my last day. It was fantastic. Anyhow, going back to event storming. So we do this kind of break of like, what are your favorite foods? It's a question people can answer without having to overthink. And if you do want to overthink it, that's fine too. That's when I demonstrate something called in private mode, which allows you to put sticky notes up. People will see scribbles, they won't necessarily see what you wrote. You can't overthink it like, oh, who else is going to put this, or what if they put that? As a facilitator, it's good so that you can get people to get used to getting out of their heads and into sticky notes. The other thing that I use in this example is Parma violets. And s'mores both have emoji. So from a digital communication thing, there are generations now that thrive with emoji as part of their conversation. As long as your platform supports it, encourage that, because you need to be able to encourage the different conversation modes out there. The other thing I point out is Parma violets, and I put the candy there intentionally because this shows a language thing. So my European friends talk about Parma violets and how it's a candy, which I had no idea. But I come from a city called Parma, and I was just like, what are violets from our city? Like, what is that? So this will teach you language as well. Not just ubiquitous, but what goes on in a particular area. All right. Now, when it comes to event storming and how big of a group you have, it can get unwieldy if you're dealing with larger corporations. We try to limit the groups to about 10 to 15 people max. After that, it gets to be really large and really hard to manage. Usually you want a co-facilitator at that point, because trying to get pulled in multiple directions to answer questions you worry about. Can I help facilitate the conversations? Can I help diffuse the conflicts? So crowd control. Recommend 10 to 15 people max when you're doing these things. If you have bigger groups and you're wondering how to manage them, look at doing smaller groups for focus modeling. So let's say you're working with one of those platforms I mentioned earlier, those complex systems, and then let's look at it in terms of modules. So there's maybe something like an accounting module and a shipping and logistics module. Maybe there's a planning module to plan work. So you can break that up. I have to laugh. Yeah, that's true, Barrett. So Barrett mentions that even 15 is often way too many. 15 can be a total handful, and especially if it's 15 people, same place, but different personalities and lots of office conflicts. That's challenging. Honestly, personally, I prefer about 5 to 7. I'd say 10 to 15. I've done bigger, it's harder. It's good to see you in the audience there, Barrett. All right. Another thing I do is time boxing. If you're dealing with me for meetings or event storming, you will find that I am typically the one managing the time. I will have timers going on when I can. Here at work, we do lightning talks, and I'm the one who will set up timers for that. But it's one of those that if you time box things, people understand, okay, I have X amount of time to focus on getting this piece done. This gives people the ability to go, okay, we need to stay focused and get this going. Now, that said, as someone who's doing the time boxing, I'm also doing audio cues. And so I'm going to tell you that, hey, there's 5 minutes left. There's 10 minutes left. I usually start to count down about 15 minutes and then go from there, because it's usually I'm doing event storming for a few hours. And so 15-minute countdown toward the end makes sense. A 15-minute, 10-minute, 5-minute, 2-minute, 1 minute, 30 seconds. Sometimes I don't do the 30 seconds just because of the chaos at the end. The last minute flurry. Something else I deal with is the yes and from improv. If you haven't had the opportunity to take an improv session, but you do find yourself wondering more, there are ways to look up improv stuff online. I have some videos that I can show you. However, if you get the chance to take an improv workshop in person, I highly recommend it. Even as a strong introvert who does not like people at all, I try to limit my peopling. I still found my improv workshop make it that much easier to deal with people. Yes and is something that I like to use with event storming because we're not saying that's wrong. We're like, let's use this. It's not necessarily yes and to the point of, hey, we're agreeing with somebody. But we're building upon each other's ideas and we're accepting each other's contributions. And then you can add your own. You might think about this like a yes and situation and go, but does this mean I'm agreeing? Well, no, not necessarily. You learn through this yes and exercise how you can say yes, and then we can also do this. Yes, and let's show how, blah. This expands possibilities, and it includes ideas rather than shutting them down. Because the minute you start shutting down all the ideas is when other people go, well, they shot this idea down. Maybe my idea isn't relevant. Maybe my idea doesn't make sense. I don't even want to suggest it now because it's just going to get rejected. You don't want that. All right, let's talk about the parking lot. First time I heard the parking lot, I was in a management training session, and they were talking about how we'll have this parking lot on the side. It was an in-person thing, and they had one of those flip charts. And on the flip chart, they were making notes of these things. It's like a parking lot. Why would you call it a parking lot? Well, that's where ideas are parked so that you go back and you don't lose sight of them. But when you think about a parking lot in terms of event storming, you have your boundaries, you have your focus, but sometimes you're going to have those things that you're like, yeah, this triggered another question. I want to ask it, but I don't want to lose sight of it, and it's kind of out of the boundaries, but at the same time, maybe have it for follow-up. Run a parking lot. Capture the ideas that could derail your meeting, especially when you're in a time box situation. Capture those complex topics that need more time. So it's not necessarily to avoid conflict, because the thing is, these are still issues. We still have to address them. But now I know that we have this really complex topic that I don't have time for in the next 15 minutes or so. So rather than trying to rush and deal with this haphazardly, let's be intentional. Let's create a follow-up meeting to talk about that. Another thing we need to be able to do is to challenge assumptions. Going into an event storming session with things in mind can be difficult, especially when it's implementation related. Maybe you already have an architectural style in mind. Maybe you already have technologies chosen. Putting the cart before the horse there. These are biases that you're going to have to challenge too. So we need to talk through, okay, there's this understanding, there's this assumption, there's this thing here that we have to address. Thing is, you have to have it in a way where it is facilitated to the point of not becoming a personal attack. You want to seek understanding. You want to see if there's gaps in understanding, missing perspectives, perhaps. But challenge things. So you could say, oh, that's interesting. Can you help me understand your perspective or the basis for that assumption? These things like, I'm wondering if we've considered, or let's explore, or there's always, what if? This also goes back to the whole having a neutral facilitator. because some of these assumptions are hard to challenge when office politics are in there. They're hard when you have people coming in with biases. It's one of those that as a facilitator, you learn to carefully walk on eggshells while not taking too much liberty there. So it's one of those where you have to be careful not to rock the boat to the point where you derail your meeting, but you also need to be able to rock the boat enough to figure out your domain. Silent modeling. So, what this is all about. Silence is important. Silence is something that we can get uncomfortable about as humans. And sometimes you feel that you have to talk to fill the gap. One of my children, I have a teenager son, and he's just telling me about how, Mama, I have to keep talking. I'm like, why do you have to keep talking? The silence is awkward. And I've told him, you have to embrace that silence. When it comes to silent modeling, this goes to like using the private view in Miro. You allow people to get out of their heads, create the sticky notes without talking to others. This one is a little bit harder to do in person. It's easier for me to do virtually. And that's just because the whole silent, as in like people will fill out the sticky notes and they just put them up. Don't ask questions. Now is not the time. Right now is just get out of your head. Create the sticky notes. Don't worry about having duplicates that comes out in the next round. But that first round is silent modeling. It can be such a beautiful thing. Because then people can get out of their heads. They can get out their ideas. Sometimes they ask the questions in that phase because they don't feel like they're being judged just yet. That's a problem that I run into with event storming, is that people are afraid to put sticky notes up because they're afraid that they're going to be judged. Judgment shouldn't be a thing. It goes back to creating a safe space. Understand that it's ideas, it's not the person themselves. Understand that you're trying to build that shared understanding. So when you do silent modeling, understand a couple things. Silence is okay. Remind them that in that silence that they are just getting out their thoughts. And sometimes the music and other background noises could be distracting. So that's why silence is okay. But don't ask questions and don't talk about others' things, what sticky notes they're putting up. Save that for the next round. So set that expectation going into the round and then reaffirm it during the round. Because inevitably you'll have that person who goes, hey, they put up this. What about? And you're just like, okay, but let's quiet down and create more sticky notes to address those questions. And it's hard, but you got to do it diplomatically. Not gonna lie, I do use my mom voice sometimes, but that's because sometimes it's what we need. All right. Active listening and validation as a facilitator, as an attendee. Showing respect to each other and listening to each other is important. You want to pay attention. Full attention. That means phones and things and other distractions put away. Close those laptops. Don't need those. Mirror language. So there is a class on Masterclass about, I think it's like negotiations with Chris Voss, and he talks about mirror language and repeating what they say in a way to show that you're listening. Not the yes, okay, not those, but show meaningful listening. Repeating the words that they say. Suspend judgment. No judging. What's the new social media meme I'm seeing? Is we listen and we don't judge. You want to listen, you want to get those ideas to come out. If you're in person, you want to watch body language as people are talking, because what they're saying versus what they're demonstrating be two different things. Again, when I see that, that's usually office politics. That's usually seniority. I use the term loosely. That's outranking each other. That's what happens there. When you're actively listening and validating others' ideas, you could say like the words, if I understand correctly, you're concerned about, So what you are saying is, and then make sure to ask clarifying questions. So if you're listening and you're still not really sure, it goes back to the being able to say, I don't know, I don't understand. Ask those clarifying questions. Because remember, with event storming, discovery is key. Discovery is key both in big picture and in process modeling. Even though process modeling is laying out the process, you will discover the pain points. You will discover the path that you didn't think your users would take that they actually took, and you're like, what? Why did they do that? Ask the clarifying questions, but listen. And if you're doing something, for example, like process modeling, and let's say you already have an application out there and you're trying to improve a process, when it comes to listening to others talking about going through the process, that suspend judgment is key, because you're going to feel like, that sounds absurd, and that sounds backwards, and that sounds like an awful user experience. Don't judge for that. See that as ways to improve, because you want your users to be happy and continue using your stuff. All right, so in reality, the thing you want to understand is that with event storming, we're trying to build that shared understanding in a safe spot. And yes, this slide is intentionally blank at the moment, so if you're like, we don't see words here, that's intentional. You're building a shared understanding and you're working together. So I need to address the elephant in the room that we saw with the problems of technical versus business. This is what I call that versus mentality. In reality, though, if you think about the project you're working on, it should not be a versus. I mean, here at Nimble Pros, we play a lot of games, board games, or some of us are video gamers. So, I mean, let's get into the versus mentality and just call it out. This isn't a versus. When we're working together, this is a cooperative game. We're all trying to have that shared understanding. We're trying to make lives easier. We're trying to automate things. We're trying to build applications to make processes smoother, for example. Better user experiences. We have goals. You need to see it as a cooperative game, like for maybe like a Forbidden Planet, for example, or a pandemic, where we're all working together to solve a problem. Having a versus of technical versus business right then and there tells me that there's a culture issue. And the reason for that is because inevitably you're going to see the superiority conflict of, oh, I know the business, therefore I am better than you. Or I know technical stuff, and therefore my technical mind is much better than yours. I've seen these egos show up. And this is what leads to problems. When it comes to event storming, you don't want to have that versus mentality. You don't want to walk into a room and go, oh, there's the person from the marketing department. Oh, there's the person from logistics. It makes sense to acknowledge where they're from, but you don't want to see that as oh, they're different than me and I'm better. That's not how any of this works. The fact of the matter is we're all different cogs in the machine that make this thing happen. For example, when I was working in retail with an IT, I was writing reports, I was writing software that made lives easier. But those lives that it made easier, I had to learn their processes. And so I had to learn things like, how do buyers buy the materials? Or how do they buy the products that we sell? How does logistics figure out which tracking to use? Things like that. It was never about technical versus. It is, how does technical help business? And how does business work with the technical side? How can we work better? It all comes back to communication. It all comes back to event storming and having those conversations. When you do certain event stormings, the sticky note colors make a difference because they represent different things. But I hate to burst that bubble of, in the end, the color doesn't really matter as much as the conversations do. Again, back to the whole merging people and having those conversations and splitting. So let's get rid of that versus mentality. So let's stop tearing each other apart And let's realize that we're working together to have that same shared understanding. So, got the verses? Start building together? Event storming will help you there. Now, with that said, let's wrap it up. In this webinar, we talked about some of the tips and tricks that I use as a facilitator, and this will help us as developers and architects because our technical minds might not always go to these spots. But let's say you're not sure really what's going on in event storming. Like, okay, we know there are different colors. What does this look like? Well, the first one here, this talks about an intro to event storming. So we talk about the different types of event storming. How do we apply them? I can tell you just by looking at this, by the image, those chat bubbles have since turned into black sticky notes, but those are pain points. We talk through a process. You see the yellows for the users of the various types. Pink are systems. Oranges are written in past tense in our events. So this gets into the basics of event storming. And then earlier this year, we did one on improving software development processes. This is for software developers and architects, and we talk about refactoring, and we talk about greenfield development and how you can use event storming in both greenfield and in brownfield and making it easier. So I didn't cover those details in today's talk because we already have them elsewhere. If you want to learn more about event storming, there's that. Now, if you're enjoying these webinars, we have more coming up this year. So HCMX is next month. Then in November tends to be our clean architecture updates because it's also when the new .NET tends to be around. The .NET Conf will happen in November, and then November 18th, we're going to do clean architecture with .NET 10. And then December, we're going to do advanced testing techniques. So we'll talk about different things you can do with testing that we haven't covered in others. Now, the reason why I say that is because we do have our webinars on demand. They are in our webinars playlist on YouTube. They're also on our website, this on-demand learning page. But we did do a talk already on design patterns for testing. And I try not to repeat the content much because there's just so much to talk about. Clean architecture, we do it with, that was our very first webinar back in May 2023. I think that was .NET 6. And we've had different versions of clean architecture with .NET throughout. Those are, like I said, are typically November. Software architecture, software development, testing, domain-driven design. Those are some of the key ones that you're going to see. Talking about documentation and decisions also comes up as well. When it comes to learning, so we've got the free webinars. We've got, of course, our social media and the blog. I don't know if you saw on September 19th, the Pirates took over. His International Talk Like a Pirate Day happened. Yeah, I might have had something to do with that as well. But those are free. But we also have Nimble Pros Academy. These, they come at a cost, but the thing is, at that point, you've got all the details that you need for things like getting started with clean architecture. We talk about ASP.NET identity as well, and I do identity essentials first because that is the foundations, it's the concepts. ASP.NET identity in action is implementing the individual accounts, and it's doing it using the Razor. It is not getting into Blazor WASM. I had questions about that. I do not get into that part. Then we have what we call our mini course, and that's documenting decisions. And I call it decisions with architecture in parentheses because this could be architectural decisions, but it could also include some business strategy decisions that impact that. The secret behind that is you want to capture the why, because in the end, that documentation is what you fall back on when you're looking at your code. And if you want to learn more about any of the things we show in our webinars, please feel free to scan that, or if you go to the bit.ly URL, that takes you to our contact page, which is how you can get in touch with any of us. I assure you there are humans at the other end. Bit.ly, I'll include the bit.ly link, and just notice on the video that I've got the video where I'm in the corner, so I'm kind of blocking that URL. I'll include the URL in the thank you email to go out, and I'll also put it in the comments in the description for the video. But if you have questions about any of these, please feel free to reach out. If you're interested in having us come and facilitate event storming sessions for you, please contact us. We will gladly come in and do that. I love event storming. I'm willing to have those tough conversations and to break biases. And if you do have that well-actually person who is hard to get out of that habit, I can help with that too. Because it works. So if you have any questions about any of these topics, please feel free to reach out. Or you can also reply to that thank you email. So if you signed up on our website for the thank you email, if you got the link to YouTube plus the link to add the ICS to your calendar, you will get a follow-up email from this webinar, which includes links to all the different resources we mentioned. I will gladly share our resources with you, so I will make sure you have all that there. All right. Well, thank you all for coming today, and I hope to see you on a future stream. Have a great day. Happy coding!